Hello, my name is Jacob Whitehead, and this is my project for History 4003. Since the end of World War II, it has been the common practice to talk about women as the supporting cast of the war. In this project, I will show that women were not just secondary support, but held primary roles in the war effort. Without women, the war would have been lost. The textbook, Through Women's Eyes, covers women in the war, but fails to expound on the individual women who made victory possible. Women like Charity Adams Early and the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion were central to the war effort. But women didn't just bring mail to the front lines or work as battlefield nurses, they also flew combat missions and worked on Navy ships. As a whole, women contributed to every area of the war. Then, looking at the real stories behind Rosie the Riveter, we see that without women in the workforce, the military would never have been able to function. Women built planes, assembled tanks, made bombs and bullets, and so much more. Today, I'm exploring how women contributed to World War II, but I'm doing it through two layers: the way women's history is presented in Through Women's Eyes, and the fuller, more complex picture we get when we bring in outside sources. I'll talk about the authors of these sources, what perspectives they bring, and what their sources include. And most importantly, I'll fill in some of the gaps left by the textbook and why it matters that we fill them. Now, Through Women's Eyes is a great book written by Ellen Du Bois, Lynn Dumenil, and Brenda Stevenson. Their perspective is academic, intersectional, and focused on long-term social patterns. The book, in Chapter 9, introduces women's wartime experiences, and it gives a broad social and historical view, emphasizing gender roles and structural change. And while the book gives an overview, it does leave out several major groups and experiences that change the way we understand women's wartime work. Overall, I want to put a larger emphasis on women's military competence. To do that, I use several sources, one of which is Valiant Women by Lena Andrews. Andrews is a national security expert who worked for the CIA and a scholar of military strategy. Her perspective centers women as militarily essential, not just socially transformative. Andrews relies on military records, personnel files, oral histories, and servicewomen's diaries. In her book, Valiant Women, she details the contributions of the over 350,000 American women who served in uniform during World War II. It highlights the crucial roles they played as pilots, mechanics, intelligence experts, nurses, and more, often facing sexism and racism while supporting the Allied victory. The main idea of the book is that women were not merely helping the war effort, they were strategic military assets whose service shaped the outcome of World War II. Then, for a deeper dive on the home front, I used the source Rosie the Riveter by Penny Kallman. Kallman is a journalist and historian of women's labor, and she uses interviews with wartime workers, factory records, photographs, and labor statistics. Her perspective is grounded in working-class women's everyday experiences. The book gives an account of how 18 million women, many of whom had never before held a job, entered the workforce in 1942 through 45 to help the United States fight World War II. Their unprecedented participation would change the course of history for women in America forever. One of the main people she focuses on is Eleanor Otto, a real-life Rosie the Riveter. Then, to gain a deeper perspective on race in World War II, I used Clarence Walker Jr.'s Unsung Experiences of Black Americans During World War II. Walker is a historian of African American identity and citizenship, and his perspective focuses on racial exclusion, democracy, and wartime contradictions. His main idea is that black women saw World War II as a battle for both victory abroad and citizenship at home, forming the double victory movement. I also draw from the Flying Dreams documentary. It uses interviews with WASPs, flight logs, and archival film. The main idea of the documentary and the stories of all of the women who served is that women pilots proved capable of flying every aircraft in the U.S. arsenal, yet they were denied military status and recognition. Together, these sources prove that women were not just support, they were essential. They weren't just on the home front or behind the scenes, they were on the front lines. Without them, the war would have been lost. When we acknowledge women as strategic actors in World War II, we expand our definition of who has the right to national honor, recognition, and military service. Putting those sources together, I'm able to expand on the gaps in the textbook and show a fuller, richer, and more accurate picture of how women shaped World War II. Filling these gaps is important for history. It's about rewriting the narrative so that people who served, sacrificed, and fought are recognized, remembered, and understood. Thank you.